Good morning, good morning, good morning. Just making sure that we're all online. Welcome to it. Primedia Broadcasting's Business Unusual webinar series. My name is Bongani Bingo. I'm the host of 702 Breakfast. And it's really great to be able to chat to you this morning through this platform. It's the first one of these I'm hosting. I've seen one or two, I've attended one or two and sent questions accordingly. Primedia really wants to reach out, obviously, at a time like this, just even watching those visuals of people getting together, people partying together, the sunshine, the crowds, the laughter, the good old times, right? Just a month or two ago, that was normal. When last did you shake somebody's hand? When last did you give someone you don't live with a hug, for example? The human touch, all the things that make us tick, I suppose, as a society, all of those not quite the new norm. And part of what we're doing today is obviously trying to navigate doing business under these incredibly difficult times. I think we've all heard that word, unprecedented. But really, this is like nothing we have seen in our lifetime. I think anybody who was around during the Great Depression of the last century will tell you even that perhaps that was something that nobody saw coming, and to live through that is something that you have to figure out, I suppose, as you go along. And so today we're focusing on the subject of business survival, business continuity, and business recovery. Those are the three themes of our discussions this morning. And we decided to create this Business Unusual webinar series to explore these different topics, to have all of this different content, to be able to show you how we are navigating the world in a time and in a way that we have never really had to. And that's really what it's been about, right? It's been the idea that through a time like this, through a moment like this, radio, I suppose, becomes that platform that people have trusted for a very long time. I think a lot of people are listening to radio, particularly the talk radio format, in ways that they haven't done for perhaps years. And we're going to delve into some of that and what it could mean as an opportunity for business. But before we even get to the money stuff, Bruce, hold on, we'll get to you. I think for me, this is really all about how we navigate this new world, this moment in our history as a society, and we've got to do it together. And I think that more than I have seen in a really long time, people not only in this country, but on the continent, around the world, this shared solidarity of an uncertain future that we are all facing together as humanity. And so however long this moment lasts, long I think may that sense of solidarity last, may that sense of coming together and understanding that it's about a shared future and hopefully about a shared prosperity. And that's what I suppose is going to underpin, for me, I think, the conversation we're going to have. So I'll introduce my panelists. You've seen and heard from Bruce, who very collegially took over that moment when I couldn't see you. But before we do anything else, we thought we'd start off today's session with a little bit of a fun poll, and it's going to come up on your screen momentarily, and we ask you, as it does, to answer the questions that pop up on your screen. And the first one in our business survival poll is, are you wearing any one of the following items? Pajamas or slippers, activewear or workwear? For me, that's going to be activewear. I'm wearing a tracksuit, which you will not see. I will spare you that. But let's get to the serious question of your business. How many people does your business employ? Up to 12, 13 to 30, 31 to 60, 61 to 120, more than 120. Answer your question. There you go. What has your marketing budget done during lockdown is the third question. Has it decreased, stayed the same, or has it gone up? And our last question there is, how would you categorize your business risk due to COVID-19? Red, high risk; amber, medium risk; and green, low risk. So those are our poll questions. The results should come up on your screen as we get all those questions back. The host obviously can't participate. I've given you a hint of what I'm wearing that you will not see today. But we'll get those results for you when they are ready. So let me get straight to it then. We've got a number of panelists with us to obviously navigate through this. We're going to do today in 3 sections, all right? Each of our sections is going to allow an opportunity for you to pose some questions to our panelists to be able to see how you are navigating this new normal that I'm talking about. What strategies to best employ in the 3 different periods we're going to try and talk to you about. Continuity, survival, and of course, recovery. Those are the 3 themes. And our panelists, in a way, if you are a regular listener of 702 and Cape Talk, hardly need introduction. And I'll get to that in a moment, but here we go. Those are the results of our poll. A lot of you, like me, in question 1 at least, are in active wear. I'm wearing a tracksuit underneath all of this. Some pajamas, some slippers, and workwear like Bruce there. It's encouraging to see the business picture in terms of the employment figures that are coming up. I would say most of the businesses, right, are over, obviously, 50%. So that's, 50% rather, more than 120. That's the number. I think that's encouraging to see in terms of the number of people. But it obviously also means there's a lot of pressure on a lot of you to deliver and to navigate this tricky time. It's no surprises there. Question 3, everyone's marketing budget has gone down. That's the first thing to go, I suppose, at a time like this. And I'm encouraged at medium risk due to COVID-19, but obviously high risk is something for us to watch out for, and the low risk we want to make sure that we navigate, and let's keep it that way for those of you. All right, we appreciate those results, and let's get straight to it. Our panelists, as I say, hardly need introduction. Bruce Whitfield is going to be in conversation for most of the 3 sessions with Pavlo Phitidis, and Bruce is really a star on our Primedia broadcasting platforms, an award-winning journalist, financial journalist. He's got a new book, The Upside of Down. I cannot think of a more timely title, Bruce. Something of a seer, I suppose. Maybe you threw the Sangoma bones to be able to look into the future, but certainly a timely title. Bruce can tell you a little bit about that. Financial Journalist of the Year many, many times over. He does present The Money Show on 702 and Cape Talk. Broadcaster par excellence, really. I think many of us in the business look to him as a model of
okay,
what we
stop
want
it,
to
stop
achieve.
it, stop it, stop it, stop it, stop it. People are here to listen
My
to
check is in the mail.
Mark Barnes is still in charge of the post office. You're never going to get it, but I promise I wrote one. We need to get into the meat and potatoes, don't we, Bongani? But we know, because we're in crisis mode. I mean, if you just look at the shopping mall behind me, there's nobody in it. I mean, I'm sitting in this mall all by myself, and that is the brutal reality, of course, of the situation we find ourselves in. I mean, it's a tough, tough environment.
As I said, it's nothing like anything we've ever thought we would live through or experience, and we'll get into what it means in a moment. Bruce is going to be in conversation for most of the sessions with Pavlo Phitidis. Again, you may have heard him on 702 and Cape Talk. He's really sort of our resident business guru, if you will, our entrepreneurial and business growth contributor. He's somebody who's spoken at many conferences, both here and internationally. For 25 years, he's had experience in conceptualizing and building businesses across 4 continents. Hardly really needs any introduction. Pavlo Phitidis, always a pleasure to chat to you, Pavlo. And really, as Bruce has just said, this is not the best time for you and I to be speaking, but good to see you.
Very good to see you as well. And it's a very good time to be speaking, because not speaking, not getting different perspectives is not going to serve anyone. We really need lots of perspectives. And Bongani, what I'm really looking forward to is getting direct questions, tough questions, hard questions from all the attendees on this webinar, specific to your business, issues you need solved, and stuff that's not available on the internet. We're looking for the different perspective, the different approach, the unusual approach.
Okay, fantastic. Last but not least, Deborah Schiepers is also one of our panelists this morning. She's, of course, Primedia's Head of Research and Insights, and she'll talk you through some of the surveys that we've been doing as Prime Media, what we are noticing in terms of both listenership trends, market trends, which is obviously important for anybody in business, but also business trends, what people are worried about, what people are concerned about. But really today's session is about finding solutions, right? We're not just here to give you a sell of what we do, but we're here about finding solutions. And a lot of the issues we want to deal with, Deborah, are really, as Pavlo just outlined, the kinds of things that people want answers to, are they not?
Absolutely. I mean, you said tough questions, Bongani, and I can see Pablo's already asking the audience for them. I'm going to leave the two of them to battle it out over most of the tough questions, but I'm here representing Primedia, our brands, and obviously would love to add to any conversations that are relevant to marketing and to media that come up today.
Right, let's get straight to it. Bruce, you said that you want to get into the meat and potatoes. I kind of thought we'd do a bit of a starter, but anyway, we won't do it in that sense. Let's start with our first section, right? Business survival. I mean, a lot of business we know who are not going to make it through this really, really difficult time. And what's perhaps frightening is the idea that, you know, as we saw the news about COVID-19 emerge from the Far East and starting in Europe at the beginning of this year, and North America, I almost get the sense, certainly it's true for me, that as much as we could see what was happening there, for some reason, so many of us didn't quite anticipate how hard it was going to hit us.
I mean, it's just this most grotesque reality with which we're having to deal. And I'm afraid I don't think we're seeing the worst of it yet. We're starting to see business failures. We're seeing Edcon going into business rescue. We're seeing Comair going into business rescue. We would have SAA out of business if it didn't have Pravin Gordon standing with defibrillators at the ready to keep the damn thing alive constantly and keep pouring money into a bottomless pit. We've seen magazine publishers go out of business. Associated Magazines is gone. We've also seen the guys at Caxton throwing the towel on their publications. And there are countless other real-world small businesses that simply are not going to come out of the other end of this crisis alive. This is the worst thing to happen in our lifetimes. Just some of the data points on this. American unemployment is sitting at 33 million. That's 15% unemployment. 8 weeks ago, US unemployment was at record lows. Donald Trump was a shoo-in to be the next president of the United States. Now, maybe if there is an upside to down, and don't shout at me if your politics are different to mine, but no sitting American president has ever won an election with falling employment. And unemployment in the US is rising at, I hate the word, an unprecedented rate in unprecedented times. And I could use that word an unprecedented number of times, but I'd bore myself. In the United Kingdom yesterday, the Bank of England was saying this is the worst financial contraction in their history since 1706. When something called the South Sea bubble burst, and that was the world's, before Ponzi schemes were Ponzi schemes, that was a scheme that brought down British governments. Around the world, we're seeing catastrophic situations in the real world for countries and for companies and ultimately for people. This isn't just an economic reset, this is potentially a political reset for the world as well. If you look at what is happening in South Africa, and in government, if it's got any sort of sense of self-preservation and survival, is going to get this economy going sooner rather than later. And we're seeing the business organizations make desperate appeals because we are seeing a potential contraction in South Africa, if you're the National Treasury, in your best case scenario, of about 6% contraction. That's 3 times worse than it was in 2008. If your National Treasury's worst expectations, and this is obviously something they're modeling in terms of a long lockdown at levels 4 and 5, you see contractions of 16%. Now, that takes unemployment, which already sits officially at 30%, but in real terms is at 40% in the formal economy. This takes it way over 50%. Now, I mean, these are numbers and they're meaningless. I suppose the thing that's really brought it home, certainly to me, is the aerial footage we saw emerge last weekend, and which is still so prevalent today, of thousands of people saying, damn you and your social distancing, we're queuing in this queue for food. If we leave a gap, somebody's going to come into that gap in front of us. So we're keeping a tight line. And this line in Centurion, and there are lines like it all over the country, where people simply are queuing for some food. There are levels of hunger and desperation like we have not seen in generations in South Africa. And if we don't get this economy moving, it's going to get considerably worse. So what we need is creative solutions. What we need is opportunists to come to the fore. And in my book, which you can see so nicely displayed in the background at Exclusive Books, those lovely people have put these lovely banners up, is we need to see people walking into the malls behind me. They need to be masked up. They need to be making sure that they keep their distance from each other. They need to be washing their hands, and they need to be sanitizing everything they take home with them. But we need to get economic activity happening, because if we don't get economic activity happening, we're all in beyond serious trouble. I mean, again, goes to the word unprecedented. Let us bring in Uncle Pavlo, because Pavlo Fatidis is the managing director of Auric Business Accelerator. We spend time together every week at a distance. We, Pablo, need to be talking really about survival at this time. And I need 3 really good tips from you on survival. If we've survived this far, there's no guarantee that we're going to survive any further. There's no guarantee that we're going to make it through the next 6 weeks, the next 12 weeks, the next 30 weeks. Tell me how to survive in an environment where government is saying, please go out, keep paying salaries, keep jobs going, but by the way, you've got to do it muzzled with your hands tied behind your back while sitting backwards on your chair at home.
Yeah, and that is the sad reality. You know, the health strategy that we were lauded for globally is not, the economic strategy is not matching up to it. It's very fragmented, it's very unclear, it's very uncertain. So when it comes to relying on government direction around survival, Bruce, the thing I'm saying to all business owners, because incidentally, it's equally the same in the United States as it is in the United Kingdom. We're not special in that we have a completely confused economic strategy for the country in the midst of COVID. So don't point fingers at government. Don't say it's only us. Don't say it's a South African thing, because although it might be better organized in some parts of the world, still people are having enormous problems understanding what they can do, what they can't do, and getting access to all the support. For that reason alone, I fundamentally believe that because the environment is so uncertain and there is no real clarity around COVID itself, which means by definition, the road ahead is going to remain uncertain. There are experts who are disputing each other around the virus itself. There are experts disputing what ought to be in place and what not ought to be in place. So as a business owner, you need to sit down and say, there's only one strategy, and that is prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Don't invest in the hope for the best. And prepare for the worst means, at this point in time, capital preservation. And the way to get that right is to understand very clearly what you do and what you can't do if you don't have what you need to do it. Example, what is absolutely core and strategic to your purpose as a business? You need to look at it in terms of the talent you have, the people you have, the relationships you have with customers and suppliers, the plant and equipment, the vehicles, the stock. You need to look at it and say, without this list, I cannot trade at all. That's what you've got to hold on to very tightly. Everything outside of that, in the first instance, you need to let go so that you can stop the bleed, preserve capital, and create the shock absorber for the uncertainty over the next 3 months.
Pablo, I mean, that's all well and good. And let's assume that because we're sensible people, we've done all of that stuff already, because we wouldn't have made it this far if we hadn't. In the world, the practical world, there are, I mean, on Wednesday, questions were coming through about things like, how do I keep my team on board without having to pay them myself? And we know UIF has been full of problems and has been really lumbered through incompetence and all sorts of other issues, and government throwing the brickbats at its customers, us, and saying, well, you didn't fill in the forms properly. I mean, we've got a massive bureaucracy, of course, which is most frustrating. But from a practical perspective, we've got to keep our teams in place. We've got to ensure that whenever we are allowed to reopen for business, we are able to call on those people once again and say, do you remember when I sent you home, I enabled you to get an income, you got the skills I need, you got the expertise I need, let's get going again. You don't want to lose those people, you don't want to make them grumpy, you don't want them to be cross with you when they come back. So practical terms, how does that going to work?
So look, Bruce, there are going to be three different ways that you work with your teams and your employees. If I go back to the example of what is core and strategic to your purpose, without which you can't operate, the members of your team that are part of that core strategic requirement need to be the first people that you engage with and hold on to. During the lockdown period, what has horrified me is a lot of people have entered into it wholly unprepared on two levels. In the first case, people did not create channels of communication. They did not enable their teams to communicate with them, nor themselves to communicate with their teams. The second thing is, a task of work was not set that recognized everything you did to succeed as a business, everything that your teams did to succeed as a business leading up to the lockdown will have to be different going forward for the next 16 to 18 to 24 months. And in that, the type of work that you should really be doing with your teams is those teams that are customer client facing should be removed from transactional behavior, in other words, selling behavior, to relationship engagement behavior. And simply saying to a team member, you know, go and talk to customers, see how they're doing, is not good enough. Because the engagement with those customers needs to be crafted and structured so that you, from looking at what customers are saying, can start beginning to prepare a new way of offering your services and products to clients. Suffice it to say, the problems that your customers and clients are experiencing today are fundamentally different to the problems that you were solving for them pre-COVID. And your ability to work with your sales and marketing teams through relationship, engagement, and discussion to understand what that new problem set looks like and how those customers want those problems solved is imperative. Your ops and admin teams, they should be facing your suppliers, and they should be putting and pulling innovation out of your suppliers. I'll give you a really good example. A number of years ago, I got involved with a client of mine who ran an enormous turnaround in the Western Cape. It was a clothing store, a clothing manufacturer. Very, very old, very well established, lots of habits and lots of comfortable relationships in the supply chain, lots of comfortable relationships with customers, but things were fading and failing for the simple reason that China, Indonesia, Malaysia, those environments were producing clothing products cheaper. Bruce, when we went into that business, it had around 3,500 staff. The business was on the brink of absolute closure. It was a turnaround instanceless. And what happened? The first thing we did is we spoke to the people on the floor. We spoke to our teams and specified, this is what lies ahead. This is how serious it is. This is what we think we need to do to get it right. Those of you customer facing, what are your views and what do you think we should do? Those of you in the production and fulfillment side, where are the efficiencies? Massive insights came from that alone. Simply having an engagement with your team and structuring and helping your team engage with customers and suppliers already will yield a lot of what your future business needs to look like.
For those of us who are going through the process, and many people hiding in their studies watching us this morning from their children who are doing homeschooling or alleged homeschooling, will know that you can't deliver solutions in the digital world in the same way as you delivered them in the physical world. Teachers are working so blooming hard and are not necessarily getting the support that they need from the schools they represent in order to rethink the way they deliver education. In the same way as you may be getting frustrated with the way in which education is being delivered and the huge pressure that's being put on kids at the moment, you've got to take that sort of thinking and apply it to your teams and be saying to your teams, You know what? These were your KPIs in the real world. We're now in Digital Central, and actually we're going to fundamentally alter the way you work and you deliver results for the business. How do we do that?
So there are a couple of ways. The first thing is, if you've got team members that say, you know, I'm not comfortable with technology, and I say this with a lot of sensitivity, that is a dead person walking. Because over the next 18 months, unless you, whoever you may be, develop a relationship with technology, how do you, in an environment where we're going to enter back into the economy and possibly draw back away from the economy as we see our COVID infections increase during the winter period? That is a very, very likely scenario. So if you hold that idea in your head and you communicate that idea to your teams, the first part of communication with your team is to say, we need to be able to talk to each other. And we need to be able to talk to each other across 3 levels. There's going to be a cultural element. So what we will be doing is we will be having a once a week town hall with the entire team, seeing how everyone is, and it's purely a social touch base engagement. People who work with people want to see that their colleagues are doing okay. It settles everyone. People who work with people who are going through what you've just described, Bruce, want to hear from their colleagues that their colleagues too are suffering from the same challenges. The next level of engagement has to be the digitization to communicate with your customers and clients. And yes, you can use email, but then you're missing an enormously valuable opportunity, because a cold email engagement between yourself and your clients yields not nearly the same value as an opportunity to zoom in with the client, where you physically see the person in front of you, they physically see you, and all the gestures that we enjoy in reading body language along with communication develop an empathy and connection. And then the third level of engagement has to be around the tasks that you craft and set for your staff. For that, I'm hoping you've got a CRM, you have a ticketing system, or you have some other means, whether it be Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any one of those technologies, to ensure that your team are doing what they need to be doing at the right point in time and in the right manner. Every day that goes by that you miss out on the intelligence of what the future market looks like puts you in a position where you might be 1 or 2 or 5 or 15 steps behind your competitor.
Thanks, Pavlo. I mean, yeah, people who work with people are some of the luckiest people in the world. I'm not going to break into song. Deborah Skippers, is anybody listening to the radio? I mean, not us right now, because we're very busy and focused and concentrating, of course. But what are media trends? What's happening in the world of media trends? What's happening to media consumption with our favorite magazines going to the wall because advertising revenues have collapsed there? There's less and less opportunity for distraction. What's happening?
So, I mean, to address the radio question, I think we have to understand what's been happening with consumers. And around the world, media consumption is up, which is amazing. I mean, it's the stats are consistent and really, really exciting. What we have found, though, is a really interesting dynamic within that. And we see it in South Africa from our own research as well. Our audiences are up on Primedia, and the reason that they tell us they're turning to us is less about information. It certainly was at the beginning. They wanted breaking news and credible news, but it's more about connection and community. And I mean, it's incredibly unfortunate to see what has happened to some of those magazines, because I think there were such strong relationships with the reader. There's such a lovely sense of trust that they built up through the editorial consistency. We think radio is fulfilling much of that same need. There's a relationship aspect of it, and that's why the audiences are up so much. Music streaming, Spotify, and other platforms is actually quite flat. So we've been looking at the European charts, Italy in particular, and the US as we go. And there's definitely something more than just listening to music that people are listening for.
Thank you, Deborah. I mean, the sense of connection and the sense of community and the sense of wanting to be part of something bigger than ourselves is absolutely pivotal. And we're certainly getting that sort of feedback as we are on the radio on a daily basis. I'm sure, Bongani, you feeling it as well. That connection, of course, comes through to us today in terms of lots of questions. What are you seeing, Bongani?
Well, yeah, I've been making notes of a number of them. And because we want to get through to the next topics, I'm going to sort of give you a broad summary of what people are raising. Digital strategies, I think you mentioned a little bit about that, online communication in terms of managing people both internally, but also obviously communicating with customers. But also I think there's a common thread of people looking for opportunities through a difficult time like this, trying to consider new services, new offerings, looking for opportunities and adding to what people are already doing. But also a sense, and I suppose, Pablo, you might want to weigh in on this, this idea that you cannot compare yourself to where you were a year ago or even 2 years ago. What was once your best is no longer the area to focus on, but really just getting through this and seeing what will be left at the end of the day. So broadly speaking, I think those are some of the concerns people are raising. Bruce, I'll start with you. The issue of the UIF, I think you and I have dealt with this on our shows. We've had the commissioner, the minister, the director general, a lot of people still frustrated with government responsiveness to the issues and challenges so many small businesses in particular are facing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and this is the thing where people don't want to lose their staff, but they don't want to cast their staff out, and they don't want to leave their staff at the mercy of the bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy is so restrictive. And Thulas and Mahlase, with all the best will in the world, what we are seeing is the fourth industrial revolution myth that government has been peddling for a long time, as we see it in social grant queues, and we see it in the sort of processes. And government systems are so flippant antiquated, it's deeply frustrating. But yes, Pablo, I mean, I'm going to do the hospital pass to you from a practical perspective. Are you seeing people who you consult to struggling with this process as they look to consolidate their revenues?
You know, it's completely fragmented. Just before this webinar, I had a briefing session with about 35 of our South Africa clients, all in one session. And the question of the UIF came up. Some had had fantastic success. Others were really struggling to get the payments made. And it seems to me that the size of the team really plays in over here. Yeah, absolutely. There is paperwork that needs to be done. The application process has to work properly. And I actually agree with that, because if I look at the furloughing system that was deployed in the United Kingdom, the level of abuse that took place over there on taxpayers' money was enormous. So you need proper, solid process over here. The payment behind the process, however, seems to be what's stalling. And Bruce, the only way I can account for that is we need to be realistic around what government says it can do and wants to do and what government can do. Government is in a position where it needs to say the right thing, most definitely. But we are now all paying for the years of Zuma administration that unwound and broke the systems of delivery. So through no fault of yours, mine, or anyone else's, that's where we are. And I go back to what I argued earlier. I really think it's important as a business owner, you apply for what you can apply for, give it a good go, apply the process, make a noise, but then simply move on and get on with it again. Because the risk is that if you don't, you won't manage yourself through this process. You will allow yourself to start blaming, getting frustrated, getting angry, and none of that puts you in a position, A, where you can lead your team with positive action, and B, those opportunities Bongani was speaking about, they will be blind to you because you're clouded by anger, you're clouded by fear, you're clouded by anxiety. I really mean it. It's so important to manage your mindset and to be positively inclined, looking for opportunity in a realistic environment. The next point I want to make, just something you said earlier, Bongani, please don't pivot. This word pivot, the word pivot was born out of the West Coast of America. And it was born during the flash years of internet startups. And the argument always was, which is valid in that environment, this is what you do, this is your idea, but as you go to market, you discover that in fact there's an alternative, better path to success in business growth. For startup businesses, it is vital, but for established businesses, you have an established asset stack. You have knowledge in your sector, you have knowledge in your industry, you've got knowledge of your clients, you've got knowledge of your team, you've got knowledge of suppliers. And what I saw in the early stages of COVID were a whole lot of companies that out of the blue went into manufacturing sanitizers and face masks and. They didn't understand the supply chains. They didn't understand how to get the bottling right. They didn't understand how to get the labeling right. They never had a route to market. And whilst they were dabbling in what was this flash in a pan opportunity, their competitors were bedding down and moving into their client bases. As tough as it is, I do believe that the right approach is to stick to your knitting, double down on it, deepen your expertise there, because if you can sustain it for the next 3 to 4 to 5 months, you will be trading in an environment that has 50% fewer customers that you had or competitors that you had pre-COVID.
It's something Brian Joffe lives by, Bongani. Sorry, just 1 second. I'll hand straight back to you. It's just a quote from Brian Joffe, which occurs to me as you say that, Pavlo. He says, competitors won't wait for you to muster your firepower. And it is about absolute focus and ensuring that you are the competitor who's still left standing. Sorry, Bongani, to you.
Well, I think that segues very nicely into the second sort of theme of our conversation, the idea of continuity then. Do what you know. Do what you know how to do, but at the same time, the temptation to pivot, Pavlo, remains very strong because everything has been upended, the things that we think we know. How do you continue then along those lines? How do you not sort of follow the new trends that you are seeing? How do you not get left behind?
Well, by 2 things, or 3 things. Firstly, if what you did pre-COVID was relevant and useful to your customers and clients, it will be post-COVID. Post-COVID means this. It will be as the economy opens to allow you to trade, and it will be 18 months from now. So if you adopt that view, saying what I did pre-COVID was valid, and therefore it will be valid 18 months from now, and it will be valid as the economy opens, the gap that I need to close is to change the way that I did things pre-COVID to be more suitable, compatible, and accessible to my customers during this period here. Now that will apply to most businesses, but not all. The fundamental truth or the reality is if you had in fact, let's take a very, very difficult example, because one of these sectors worst hit has been the restaurant sector. Pre-COVID, what did you do? You sat yourself in a big fat mall with big fat rents, relying on big fat foot traffic. That was your business model. You had a menu. The menu created engagement through food on a social level across tables. You had 150 tables in your restaurant. You had waiters. That's the business model that operated. What was the problem you were solving? You were solving for your clients and customers a place to eat in a social setting where you would be served with a menu that met your requirements and your budget and your mood in that environment. You can't offer that now, quite clearly. So where is the opportunity? The opportunity is not to move out of the restaurant industry. We all know that 10 months, 15 months, whatever the timeline is, we're all going to be going back to restaurants pretty soon. The restaurants that move out of the restaurant industry are going to lose that opportunity in its entirety. But what do you have? You've got big kitchens, you've got capability with the supply chain to get food inputs at a very, very low price. You have waiters and chefs and the ability to craft menus. We have the early stages of the economy opening up. How are you serving those customers and clients that you had before, now during that period? What they require is food for home. They either require access to affordable food or pre-cooked food, going back to Bruce's situation, where every home is now involved in housekeeping, teaching, earning, working, sweating. That's the kind of thinking you should be adopting and saying, with what I have, how can I reach that audience and how can I provide it? That's what I would rather use instead of the word pivot. Stick to your knitting and find a way to now respond to the different changed circumstances of the customers you supplied and served before COVID, because if you build that relationship with them tightly now, when we emerge back into a normalized economy, you're going to be front of mind.
Pablo, I want to add to that. I think one of the dangers of pivoting is also that you do have a brand equity in the market and you've got a relationship and a positioning with your customers. And if you suddenly change that, you're starting from scratch. So you need to know what you stand for them. Are you a caregiver? Are you an authority figure? Are you an innovator? And whatever that might be, your tonality should carry through. Innocent Smoothies is an example of a brand that's kind of quite cute and quirky, and that's their tonality. And they didn't suddenly change that and become incredibly serious. And they worked with what they had, and they kept consistency with what they had so that they didn't lose that equity.
Completely. And, if you look at how you then still market what you're doing, before you would say, every Tuesday, 2-for-1 pizzas, or whatever the case was, or for anniversaries or Father's Day or Mother's Day or birthdays. That's how the restaurant classically would have advertised. Nowadays, and I'm betting you that this message will land well, because I'm engaged with a number of restaurant clients and I'm listening carefully to the trials and tribulations. Imagine if the message now changed. Hey, pre-COVID, we had great specials for fun and celebration, whether it be birthdays or anniversaries. Post-COVID, we are sitting with 380 waiters that we are responsible for. We need you, our customers and clients, to please engage with us. We're creating home-cooked meals. We're creating a whole suite of services to make your lives in your homes more comfortable, more affordable, and more convenient. Please visit our website and see what we have done. And with every transaction, we can hold on to that waiter for 1 month longer. Imagine a message like that in order to say, I recognize you, client and customer. I recognize that your world has changed, and I am responding to that change by doing the following. And with that, I want to maintain my relationship with you, because in the current circumstances, the way I did it before has to fundamentally change. People are very, very ready to receive change, hear change, and see change that resonates with their own lived reality. That's a smart way of using marketing to signify a response to a new environment, and in a way that will penetrate the message through to where it needs to go.
When it comes to communication, because I think that's the other important aspect of this conversation, it's easy for people to feel a little like, rabbits in the headlights with all of this change, with all of this uncertainty. And I think some of the things that will obviously make people start feeling is this sense of a disconnect with the market, particularly, of course, if budgets have to be slashed. How do you keep your message out there? How do you keep relevant with all of these challenges?
I mean, maybe that's a good opportunity for us then to get onto the continuity segment here, Bongani. I mean, we need to get to lots of the questions that are coming through and the themes that are coming through, but continuity, you don't survive in a vacuum, Pablo Fatidis. You don't survive by putting your head in the sand. You don't survive by denying the problem that is around you. As you so clearly stated this morning, this thing is around for whatever a foreseeable future is anymore. This is again, another term, the new normal, another term I hate, but we have to figure a way through this. So we have to continue. How do we continue?
It's such a diverse question, diverse because it really depends very much on what sector and industry you're in. Last night on the Money Show at 7:30 in the evening,
Is that the time that you and I are on the radio each week, Pablo?
Yeah. The business we spoke to was a very interesting business, Bruce, because if you look at it, it's a business that relies on having presence in the retail landscape. It's in the mall environment. And in the mall environment, 64 stores, 358 staff, 358 staff, right around the malls of South Africa. They are now in stage 4 allowed to trade. But the only permissible items they can trade make up about 1% of their revenue. And that puts them between a rock and a hard place. Because if you're allowed to go into a mall to trade, there are a couple of things acting against you. Number one, you're limited in what you can trade. Number two, the footfall in the malls is going to vary wildly depending on how malls themselves respond to the COVID environment. And I want to dig into that a little bit. Imagine yourself having an option to go to a store. You want to go to an exclusive books, the picture behind you, Bruce.
Yeah.
And you look at mall number 1, you look at mall number 2. Mall number 1 has overt displays of testing pre-entering into the mall. And it might just simply be a heat test. And as you walk into the mall, there's an overt display by someone wearing safety equipment who's going to be spraying your hands. And that mall has on its store, on the front doors, it says, everyone entering and everyone leaving each and every day is tested for COVID. The other mall has nothing. So as a consumer, which mall would you walk into? And let's say you walk into the mall that has nothing. And let's say, which will happen, we start to track very actively over the winter period the infection rates and as a result the death rates related to COVID. On social media, people are only going to be seeing the death rates. They might be low, they might be high. None of us know. But that death rate is enough for me to say, I was going to that mall, I'm prepared to actually go to the other mall, even though it's less convenient, because I have faith that entering into that retail trading space, I am protected. When I arrive at the store itself, what overt displays am I demonstrating that I am very, very aware of COVID infection? So as a retailer of electronics equipment or a retailer of books, if I don't have those overt displays, what it means is this: I have not recognized that the lived reality of my customers pre-COVID has changed, and I'm not responding to the mindset that governs how people behave, shop, and engage. Those are the subtleties that need to be put in place. And that's got nothing to do with this pivoting far away from being a bookseller, if it is exclusive books, to anything else. It's about changing the experience you provide for people to acquire the products or services that they always have and always will.
I mean, one of the examples this week from Wuhan, for example, sorry, Bongani, back to you in a moment, but the Wuhan example is Wuhan opened up a month ago for business. And people have generally stayed away from public gatherings. People have generally avoided going to places because they are absolutely petrified of COVID-19. I had Mark Barnes on the radio last night as well, who wrote a really thought-provoking piece in Business Day yesterday. But he was just saying it is high time that we start treating business like grown-ups, we start treating South Africans like grown-ups, and rather than ruling by regulation and legislation and big sticks, we need to be educating and really giving people license to operate in an environment, because so many people are just ignoring the rules right now because the rules are irritating, inconvenient, restrictive, and are not at all constructive. And I'm afraid people are going to start taking, as we have a penchant to do in South Africa, Bongani, the law into their own hands.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, Pablo, you were talking about how to, I suppose, think about navigating this period in terms of your customer, but also you've got to think about managing expectations and what's going on internally. And I'm going to summarize a question from Sean. And by the way, to those of you who are watching our conversations, please type in your questions so we can get to them. But Sean more or less wants to talk about, you know, the buy-in as far as handling your own teams, right? Getting buy-in into the big picture of long-term business survival and getting through this next 12 months as a start. This thing about not comparing yourself to last year, but having a commitment to facing new challenges and loyalty and resilience, doing so at possibly less pay. How do you deal with your own internal dynamics around people's expectations, Pablo?
So look, pre-COVID, when things were more predictable, you got your business into a place or space where you had a steadiness to it, a predictability to it. The right thing to do there as a business owner is to behave like a general would in a war situation. If you could think back, those generals would stand on the top of the hill, they would organize their troops in a particular way, and they would then challenge their opponents. That's the competitive nature of business. A general looks far into the future, designs a lot of strategy with a fair degree of prediction and interpretation of the landscape in play, and then deploys their strategy. In the situation of a battle, which is where we're at, if that general remains on the hill, Bongani, and they don't behave like a warrior who leads from the front, right at the battlefront itself, they themselves are going to lose the cohesion with their team, their respect of the team, and most important, they themselves will lose the opportunity to read the signals of change that the business needs to deliver on in order to be relevant. So the first thing is, you need to lead from the front. And Bruce will know, I've always said, if you're involved right at the action front on a day-to-day basis, you will never grow your business beyond a certain level. But in a crisis, you need to lead from the front. You need to come down from the hill. You need to be at the front line. The second thing is, you need to talk to your teams very transparently. And the best message to sell them is that we're in this for the next 18 months. I would not buy into Trump's view that there will be a vaccine available in October, November. It's purely an election ploy, that. So set the worst case scenario so people can set their minds to it. When it comes to the immediacy of action, you need to say, I don't know. What we're going to do is A, B, C. From that, we will see what's working, what's not. We will discard what's not working, and we're going to do more of what is working. So you're setting very, very short-term periods. But the confidence of saying, I don't know, we're in this for the next 18 months, we will get to the other side of the 18 months, and we're going to change our activities on a day-by-day basis or week-to-week basis with me leading from the front, is what spurs and builds confidence in you as the business leader within your own organization. That's what rises and raises the confidence of a team itself.
Which is all well and good, Pablo, but I'm also going to use yourself against you when it comes to, you say throw yourself into the front line. Generally, the people in the front line are the ones that get shot first in a pitched battle. There's also the risk, of course, that you get so involved in fighting the battle and you're so busy trying to protect your soldiers that you then forget about going back to the top of the hill when it's appropriate to do so, to get that overall perspective that you so desperately need in order to get into the recovery phase. And we need to get to recovery at some point.
Bongani, I want you to please mute Bruce when I use a certain word. What I'm going to use is?
Systems!
So mute him at that point in time, please. So if you look at the approach, okay, in an environment of fundamental change with enormous stress, you go right to the front line, because at the front line you'll be followed. And here's the thing, I hear that troops get shot at the front line. There's a wonderful book called Startup Nation, and it's a book that talks to why 38% of global venture capital goes to one country that has 10 million people only, and that's Israel. And one of the arguments that the book hypothesizes is that Israel is very good at innovation. And then the book goes on further to argue the reason for it is because Israel is constantly enshrouded in conflict. And when somebody comes out of a big fancy military college to give advice and guidance, it's the people on the ground who know best, because they're reading the situation as and when it happens. That is very classical of the environment we're in. things are changing too fast to give big strategy from a distance. So go back into the trenches, go right to the front line. At the front line, you will read the signals through directing your teams with proper activities to see what's working and what's not working. When you see what's working, and this is where the key is, you have to translate what's working into systems to deliver what's working. And just to be clear on that, I'm not talking about tech, Bongani. I'm talking about activities in a sequence that can be measured, in how you market your new offering, and how when people engage with your marketing, you convert them into clients, and how once people have been converted into clients, you fulfill your obligations to them. Those systems in place then put you in a position where you can redirect your team to run the systems, knowing full well that you can start to draw back up the hill in order to look further ahead for the opportunities that will be abound in the next 6 months. So it's come down the hill to the battlefront, do the work right there before you go back up to the hill in order to capitalize on the fact that you will be one of the few businesses standing 6 months from now.
I'm going to bring Deborah back in the conversation. If I pick up on what Pavlo has just said, Deborah, but particularly the idea of you are obviously going to need to communicate to everybody who needs to know about what you do and your strategies of surviving and getting through this period. Let's just be honest about what we do as Primedia Broadcasting, right? You're talking to us about your insights and the research that you've done that says people are listening, that sense of connection, that sense of we're all in this together. What's the sell at a time like this to use our platforms to make sure that people's messages are getting across to an audience that you say is growing in ways that we haven't seen for a very long time?
I absolutely love what Pavlo was saying about how you should treat people within your team. And I think that principle of authentically being with them applies to how you treat your customers as well. Everything we've seen in our own research and in all the research papers we've been looking at talks about how important it is to be empathetic and to be real. Kantar talks about the fact that brands develop or are ideally should develop from having a functional base to an emotional one, to an aspirational one, and then ultimately end up with societal purpose. And if you're able to communicate meaningfully, I mean, I don't want to use the word authentic again because it's such a buzzword, but there is a real humanity that's coming out of this. There have been so many examples. We looked at research from our colleagues Bauer in the UK, and I think everyone has got an example in their personal lives of something that they've done that has more humanity than usual. You might have bought someone food, or you might have helped a neighbor, or you might have done something, but the situation that we're in is almost against our human construct, the isolation and the restriction and the fear. That's not what humans are about. We are about connection and togetherness, and that humanity is a theme that I think most people will relate to, that will really resonate if you use it in your marketing. And to use Pavlo's restaurant example, if you are honest about where you are and where you are in your journey with your customers, I think you've got a really good shot of having some proper messaging, obviously on Primedia platforms.
Bruce, can we recover? I mean, let's get to the last of our segments. When we talk about recovery, Pavlo is working around the 18 months prediction of coming through this. That's where, as we know, the best estimates of when we might even get a vaccine seem to be pointing at. What does a broad picture around recovery even mean?
I'm going to be careful how I do this now, Bongani, because a couple of weeks ago, people were talking about a V-shaped recovery. And then we're talking about W-shaped recoveries, where you get this recovery and you think, oh, thank goodness, it's fine. And then you slump down again. And then, of course, there's the L-shaped recovery, which is the loser recovery, which is not a recovery, it's a decline. And then you flatline, of course. You then get the bathtub recovery, which is that shape, which is where you go into a deep decline. You flatline for an awfully long time. And at some point, things have been so bad for so long, eventually there's a recovery. Or you get my personal favorite, which is the Nike swoosh-shaped recovery, which is you get this decline and you get this gradual recovery. Now, I think, and I hope Pablo backs me up on this, is that we cannot wait for the macro environment to improve. South Africa's economy is going to contract between 6 and 15%. So whatever it is this year, whatever it is, it's going to be catastrophic. What we have to do is find a way to navigate the environment. And a favorite, another Brian Joffe quote, and I'm sorry to quote him so prolifically today, but it's a Bidvest quote, and it's a mindset thing. Pablo's mentioned mindset, and in my book, The Upside of Down, there's so much about mindsets of people who solve problems in society. Our mindset has got to be one of ignoring the constraints of the environment. You've got to navigate the environment. You've got to understand the environment. You've got to work through the environment. But the Bidvest approach to this thing, and there are posters in absolutely every single Bidvest facility in the country that says Bidvest does not participate in the recession. And it's a weird kind of thing to say, but hold on a second. No matter who you are and what you do, you are in this environment. You are in the recession. Of course you're in the recession. Are you completely and utterly off your tree? But it goes to mindset, and it goes to this idea that regardless of what the environment is, it is up to you to navigate and master that environment, because those that do benefit, those that don't fail. There'll be, if you go through any of the economic crises of the last 40 years in South Africa, whether it was the oil crisis of the early 1970s, the Soweto uprising of 76, the aftermath of the Rubicon speech of 85, the debt standstill of 1987, the uncertainty between 1989 and 1994, the political transition for South Africa, in which we went to what was previously the longest period of recession in South Africa over a long period. If you go to 1998 and the Asian debt crisis, the dot-com bubble bursting, 9/11, 2008, in every crisis, the problems have seemed insurmountable. The macros went haywire. Some companies survived and some companies thrived. The difference between those that thrived and those that died is that those that thrived chose to navigate the environment rather than see the environment as an obstacle that they could simply, like any 2-year-old, they close their eyes and they believe that you can't see them anymore and the problem goes away. They go full tilt, they get their 2020 vision goggles on, and they look through and navigate the crisis. Pablo, I'm hoping you're in agreement on the broad brushstrokes of that.
There's no question about it. I quite honestly, you know, W, L, X, Y, P, whatever is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. Because the moment you start betting on that, and then it doesn't happen, you're going to completely destroy your own psychology as a human being, including your own business. I think from a recovery point of view, Bongani, there are only 2 strategies over here. As South Africans, the thing that acts against us is our xenophobia in many ways. I don't know why we don't welcome more countries into South Africa. And I don't know why we don't develop an economic strategy that inserts us in the middle of the globe.
Because it's unfair, Pablo. Don't you understand anything? It would be unfair to do so. We can't, everything must be fair. I mean, we can all go down, the ship sinks and we all drown. At least it was fair. Ibrahim Patel.
Yeah.
That's why you don't put a communist in charge of an economy. Never.
The problem is that when things are unfair and you protect it because they're unfair, you become soft and useless in many ways. There are 2 approaches. If you trade and operate in the local economy and you are quintessentially about the local economy, the thing you need to get right is get your new offering well crafted. And we've spoken about how you do that. That is about engaging your customers and clients, taking what Deborah said earlier with empathy in order to get them to speak openly and honestly to you about their changed circumstances, so that when you respond to it, you're responding in a relevant way. The second thing is that once you've got that right, you must get your business model changed. The way that you operated your business pre-COVID needs to be different post-COVID. And there's some real benefits to that. For example, do you really need the same office space that you had before? In other words, if you're getting good traction in the market with these new offerings, if the way you're working with your team, which has become increasingly digitized, are you able to do what you did before differently with a significantly lower cost base? Because that's going to set you up to sustain the next 6 to 12 months.
Okay, I'm going to give you a problem, all right?
Yes.
Nothing that we've discussed or workshopped. Let's say, for example, I have a factory, and I'm going to put my factory in, where's properly isolated in South Africa? Port Elizabeth. Port Elizabeth is a long way away from everywhere. I make industrial brushes. I'm a specialist. You told me to focus, so now I'm a specialist industrial brush manufacturer, and I'm based in Port Elizabeth. Now, I have got industrial customers, I've got industrial clients who are not operating anymore because Abraham Patel in his wisdom has said, no, manufacturing is deadly and dangerous, and we've seen so many. I mean, there've been horrible stories of factories where people have not been looked after properly and people have got sick. Let's be open and transparent about that. But in an environment where owners are responsible and don't behave like it's the Industrial Revolution of the 1800s, and they actually treat their people and care for their people, they're not allowed to operate. So now I make these industrial brushes. I'm allowed to operate because I'm seen as an essential service, except my customers are not regarded as an essential service. So they're not buying from me. Now, how on earth do I get my industrial brush business situated at the windy bottom bit of the country, functioning in this digital environment? There's your challenge, Pablo Bettini. Solve it.
So Bruce, you're not going to get your business operating at the same level that it was in a normalized economy. And I'm really pleased you picked that example because I haven't spoken to you since last night. And just this morning, I was speaking to a plastics extruder who then I set up with an organization that focuses on industrial design. And in that, they are now moving into a situation where with the new industrial design layouts they are making in order to accommodate smarter manufacturing processes, in order to accommodate a lowering cost of production capability, in order to get to the other side of the COVID economy with the reduced demand, they're creating screens that allow line of sight, which is fundamental and critical in a manufacturing plant, but also that provides some sort of physical distancing, so they see through screens. And it's collaborations like that, where if I'm the industrial brush business, I'm saying, who were my customers? Who is serving my customers? Which of my customers are red, non-operating, amber, able to kind of operate, and green, operating well? And what do I need to do differently to what I've done before to get my product into their environments? Do I need to collaborate with other players? In other words, people who do industrial cleaning for those essential services that are operating. It's that mindset that gets you through to the other side. But there's another big benefit. So let's go for a more difficult environment. The more difficult environment is I design and craft plant and equipment for the industrial landscape. And I'm infuriated by the DTI's response to our industrial landscape. As an aside, it is the single biggest competitive advantage we have in Africa. It's the one thing we've got that would make us enormously valuable to the rest of Africa. And if we focused on that alone as a country, we would not be sitting with the growth rates we've had for the last 4, 5, 6 years. But let's put that aside. If I'm sitting in a situation where with my plant and equipment, I've managed to, when I install plant and equipment, it requires my customer to make a massive capital expenditure up front. And right now, you can't get those deals done. But if instead I turn around and said, you know what I'm going to do? I'll make the plant, I'll make the equipment, I'm going to install it, and Mr. Customer, Mrs. Customer, I'm going to do so at my cost. And you will then give me a service contract for the next 7 years. Because the funding that's available to support that kind of mindset is enormous. And what that business then enjoys is an annuity revenue for the next 7 years, which has a major impact on its valuation. It smooths out the business model, and it creates stability and predictability of revenues. So there are a number of strategies that I think local players should be focused on. Then there's a whole world out there, not of corporates, but of growing small and mid-tier businesses that, with the ability now to force digital engagement with customers and clients and staff and suppliers out of sheer necessity, starts to position you on this rand dollar as a potential provider of services abroad. And Bruce, I'm already seeing it. The businesses that got aggressive on digitizing fast have capitalized on this. What are we sitting on the rand dollar today?
It's actually improving. It's going in our favor, but I can tell you, as of this very moment, while I subtly just go and look at my screen, we're sitting at 1844, which is still 20%, 25% below where it was in January. The opportunity knocks.
Yeah, the opportunity does. You know, I had a roundtable yesterday with the mid-tier businesses we work with in the UK. The most frequent question coming out is on the pound rand.
23.22.
What can we outsource? What can we do to lower the cost of our operations that can be provided on the same timeline with South Africa? And for those mid-tier businesses, if you force the digitization locally, it positions you to play internationally. That's where I think the light is shining very bright, Bongani. That's the mindset you need to navigate the recovery process you're going to be going through.
Well, let me give you a specific question. This is from Graham, who's watching our conversation. And Graham wants to know, if we all have a capital preservation mindset, when and how will the entire economy have the confidence to buy and sell and pay each other again? Could we spend our way out of this, Graham wants to know.
Well, I'll give you my view on it. And Bruce, you'll have a bigger picture view on it. You know what, Graham? I have a list longer than your arm and my arm put together of how government holds back this economy. The bureaucracy, the red tape, quite honestly, for the last 10 years, the completely shoddy economic leadership and policies. And on the one hand, I bemoan our fate around it. But on the other hand, what I'm very aware of is this. When I look at our clients in the US, they've got a different host of troubles that they've got to overcome. Far less than we do, but it's still there. The same applies to the UK. I see it as a South African with a different mindset. I'm saying whether that is the case or not the case is something of intellectual curiosity. It is nothing that I have control over. So what I'm going to do is assume that spending is going to be held back, and I'm going to craft a way to eat my competitors' lunch. So irrespective as to whether the economy grows or not, I will grow in this environment because I'm thinking differently, and most importantly, I'm acting differently. So I can't answer your question directly, but I can certainly answer it from the perspective of a business builder or entrepreneur.
Okay,
Bruce,
let me throw it at you in a different way, Pablo. I mean, surely the money that we're spending has got to be spent on growth projects. It's got to be spent on acquiring opportunities, whether that opportunity is spending it in an environment where there isn't too much competition, for example, in advertising, because people are scared to advertise. If I can get my product to market, surely what I should be doing is be telling people about it. I should be marketing myself. I should be promoting myself in an environment which is a veritable desert. And therefore, I stand out as a lone voice providing perhaps a solution to people's problems. If we're all focusing all the time on preserving capital, then we're not got the growth mindset that you keep telling us we need to have. So we need to be spending judiciously. We need to be spending in a way that helps us grow, not just spending for the sake of spending. If you've got a 4-year-old car and you were hoping to upgrade it in year 5, sure, you're going to have to drive it in year 6 and 7. You're probably not going to have an option on that. And the nice thing is, that your neighbor is going to be doing the same thing. So they're not going to be judging you on the fact that you're being a slightly more parsimonious than normal. But when it comes to finding business opportunity, surely if there is an investment in the future that you can make, it is finding growth opportunities and investing in those growth opportunities, whether it is maybe not yet, but waiting for asset prices to fall enough so that you can buy out competitors or market directly to competitors' customers, whatever it might be. Spending in a targeted and judicious fashion is the sort of spending we should be encouraging.
Well, it would be suicidal not to, Bruce. If you're getting traction on the ground with what you're doing and you seeing yourself able and capable of moving to that 6-month timeline from now, be assured, and anyone who would have listened to the Money Show, I think it was it on Tuesday that you spoke to Edward Kisvetter?
Yeah.
And he was talking about tax collections. There is real, I'm sorry to say it in this way, but there's a lot of blood in the streets in the world of SMEs. So if you are one of those mid-tier businesses, here's a perspective, a different perspective. Your corporate competitors are completely unable to do anything in this environment. They're simply too big. They're simply too widespread. There's simply too many people. Their ability to respond by innovating new offerings into the COVID economy is low. Not impossible, but low. The very small businesses are all going to move to the wayside. They're going to emerge into the informal economy, and that's going to starve them from the main economy in its own right. So if you are that mid-tier business and you're playing in your space and you're sticking to your knitting and you're not pivoting, but you're realigning your offerings to meet this new environment, to not go and shout from the hilltops that you have responded effectively, puts you in a position where people who don't know about you, in other words, people who used to be served by your competitors and now need the service the way you're providing it, it keeps them unaware of your situation. The second thing is this: there's not one media business out there that has got real reach that won't do deals with you. If you don't approach a media opportunity with an entrepreneurial mindset in this tough economy, you're losing a real opportunity, because you can entrench and embed your brand effectively through deals that are being offered far and wide at the moment.
I guess as we wrap up this conversation, I'll let you, Deborah, pick up on what Pablo just said, particularly in getting that message across. Marketing strategies are things to think about at a tough time like this, quite specifically. We're seeing research, for example, that suggests that millennials are consuming platforms that they haven't, like radio, for example, in ways that they haven't before. So as you wrap up your conversation, from your perspective, what do you want businesses to think about Primedia's offering in terms of getting people's messages out there?
I think Pavlo's absolutely right. You, as much as you can, I mean, you're balancing cutbacks, obviously, with having a voice, but as much as you can, you have to have a consistent, honest, real voice, because if it's L or V or W shaped, we will come out of it. We'll all come out of it, and there's an opportunity to position yourself for the future. Bongani, you're absolutely right. Media consumption habits are changing. I mean, we even see from a consumer behavior point of view, sleep habits are completely disrupted. We've got our panelists saying they're up at 3 in the morning and they don't know why, and they're waking up later and they're waking up earlier, and you can almost see it on Twitter. I think I am one of those people, actually. And there is someone, every morning at 3 o'clock who just starts a conversation, which also speaks, in fact, to the opportunity around e-commerce and addressing global markets. You really should be on 24/7 nowadays, not just for global markets, but for the sleep-disrupted South Africans. But, I mean, completely disrupted media habits, completely disrupted sleeping patterns, a lot of uncertainty about what to buy, what to invest in, what to hold back on. you have to persuade consumers that you're worth it, you're the place to be, and you're still going to be there when we come out of it to have a chance at those consumer wallets.
Pablo, I'm just thinking of some of the key themes that you've been saying. I'll ask you for your final comment. You said we've got to stick to our neat knitting. Business leaders must lead from the front, but they must also be able to come down and see what the reality on the shop floor is, adjust to rapid change. But I suppose of all the things you've said today, I think the thing that resonates most strongly with me, because of what I have to do every day, is the positivity mindset that no matter what we are facing, backs against the wall, we've got to find that sense of seeing a little bit, of the rainbow, even though it may be very far, far, far away.
Getting into a positive mindset, there are quite a few ways to do it, Bongani. So the first is you need to understand a little bit around yourself. You need to understand yourself, how you respond to very, very trying, testing times. Because if you don't master your own mindset or attitude, consciously or unconsciously, it affects the way you behave. And the way you behave then perpetuates the mindset that you hold. So if you have a mindset that says, I'm in this on my own, no one is prepared to help me, I'm pointing a finger at government, I'm pointing a finger at everyone else around me, I will soon find myself pointing a finger at my staff, because here I am carrying their salaries every month. What are they doing to help me? And then I'll point a finger to anyone who says anything around what I should be doing differently. It really is critical that you just get a grip, that you get a grip of your mindset and you say, I am going to be one of those businesses last standing. And I'm going to do what I need in order to get there. And I'll tell you where the answer to your truth lies. It lies in action. Because the moment you act on something, it gives you a sense of empowerment. And the moment you feel empowered, you start to get a sense of self-belief again. Remember all those crazy, crazy pictures of people buying toilet paper. It was completely understandable. Here is a person who's saying, oh my word, we're all going to die. That was the mindset that they had. That was their mindset they had. I'm going to act in order to protect myself and my family. And I'm going to buy 17,000 rolls of toilet paper. Now, you and I both know that buying toilet paper doesn't stop you from getting infected or stop you dying from COVID if you're vulnerable. But the action of it, as opposed to sitting back and saying, it's not fair, how did we land here? It's the Chinese fault, they could have stopped it, or whatever. I'd far rather be that person buying all the toilet paper than the armchair critic sitting back and saying, look at him. You know what? Actually, this could have been stopped. Actually, we would have done it differently if only we had. That kind of languaging that you use during this time for yourself and especially your team is where I think the winners and the losers will emerge.
Bruce, I started this conversation by talking about this idea of solidarity that I think has emerged globally, that we're all in this together, right? And yet it's obvious that there are mistakes that have been made in many countries, including our own. You've mentioned the craziness, for example, of saying e-commerce shouldn't function because it's unfair to the spaza shop. There are a lot of things that, no matter how positive Pablo is telling us to be, that frankly are outside of our control, and yet many people are saying, talk to me, I've got an idea, I've got a solution, just let me do what I know how to do. What then in that context would be the upside of this down?
Okay, so I mean, I think through 20 years of interviewing billionaires, because that's how I roll. I hang around with billionaires all the time. And what I can tell you is that business nous and knowledge and wisdom doesn't sort of transfer automatically. It's study hard work. But talking to people who have created great businesses over long periods of time, people who have built businesses in hostile environments, really difficult environments in South Africa, people who have been through far tougher times than, frankly, we've experienced so far and have navigated their ways through this thing. It is about being an opportunist. There is a sign that is just under the light switch in my kids' music room at school, and it says, "Dear optimists, pessimists, and realists." Now, you know these people, don't you, Bongani? You know these people who go and they phone you in the morning and they say, "You know, Bongani, I'm not a racist, but," or they phone you and they go, "You know, Bongani, I'm really an optimist, but I'm not an optimist or a pessimist. I'm just a realist." And you just know that they've capitulated. They've given up. They are people who are trying to justify a particular framework, a particular way of thinking. So it says, "Dear pessimists, optimists, and realists, while you were arguing about the level of the glass, whether it was half full or half empty, I drank it. Regards, the opportunist." And frankly, if you don't have an opportunistic mindset in South Africa right now, if you're not looking to solve problems, if you're not saying, "Hold on a second, we are in Problem Central." It's one of the founders of Waze who told the 2018 Sunday Times Company of the Year, Top 100 Companies of the Year awards. He said to them, "You'll make a lot more money out of solving misery in the same way as Waze went out to solve traffic problems. How do you find ways around the obstacles? You make a lot more money out of solving misery than you do out of providing comfort." Just talking to Arthur Gillis, who is involved with Marriott Hotels and Protea Hotels in South Africa last night. They're all closed down. You can make them as comfortable as you like, but if you can't open your doors, you can't trade. South Africa is a place of misery generally. I mean, the Gini coefficient, the stark inequalities of our society, all of these things. But there is need in our society, there is demand in our society for the right services and the right products to serve those and find solutions now for the problems, because these problems aren't going to disappear overnight. These problems are with us to stay. They're with us to stay for the duration. If you can find your way to solve one of those problems effectively in a way that nobody else is doing, then I think the country and possibly even the world is your oyster, regardless of how tough this environment is.
I think that's where that's a good place to leave it. Just to let everyone know, of course, these conversations are going to be available online. This isn't the first. It is certainly not the last. I think Terrell's comment there at the end sums it up quite nicely, saying, "Thank you. This has affirmed much of what we are doing, which is most encouraging, as well as giving some excellent context. Very much appreciated." And I think that's what this is about. I said earlier, that we're not just here to tell you what our offering is in terms of the opportunities to market and communicate your message, though that is what we do, but we're also in the mindset of saying, where are we? How do we find that common touch, that connection that Deborah spoke about in terms of going through all of this together? So Business Unusual, this webinar series, we're going to continue having these conversations. And I really think it's been a tremendous, hour and a half or thereabouts of talking about the things many people in business are feeling, worried about, concerned about. I always say a good talk is like a good haircut. The hair is going to grow again. So that's where we will leave it for today. We'll continue, of course, these conversations. And as I said, after this one, we'll upload this one and continue watching out for others to come. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Thank you to our excellent panelists. That's where we will leave it for today. Ciao, ciao.